of Ukraine and Russia is for the killing to stop. The longer this goes on, the worse it risks becoming a physical war. It risks engulfing the entire European continent. I mean, we talked about food prices earlier. Ukraine produces a large amount of the world's food supply. If this war goes on for much longer, you're going to have whole continents, I mean, Africa, Europe, that are starving because we're prolonging a war instead of bringing about peace. And I think the specific plan is you've got to get the Russians and the Ukrainians. You got to get them in a room together. You have to engage in actual diplomacy, which unfortunately our current leadership is completely unwilling to engage in diplomacy. And you ask the Ukrainians, what do you need? And you ask the Russians, what do you need? And you try to force them to come to a peaceful settlement. It could look different ways. It's going to depend on the skills of the negotiator and what their needs are at that moment in time. But I actually think that with Donald Trump's leadership, we can get to a peaceful settlement in Ukraine very quickly.
Do you think Ukraine will be put into a situation where it has to cede some of the land that Russia had taken during this conflict?
I honestly think that the Ukrainians are going to have to make that decision themselves. But Chris, man, they're already so exhausted. When you talk to, Ukrainian leaders, especially in private, but even in public, they're starting to say this now. They're saying this can't go on forever. They don't have the manpower, they don't have the equipment, they don't have the money. And so I think ultimately, again, Ukraine is going to have to make that decision. Russia's going to have to, of course, make the decision about what it will do to stop the fighting. But we're going to have to get these guys together. We don't have to like Russia. We don't have to agree with them invading, but we've got to get them together and engage in some real diplomacy, or this thing's going to go on forever.
But do you think America's starting position should be, you got to give back what you took, or do you think that's part of the compromise?
I think that our starting position should be the killing must stop, and we're going to use American power to bring about peace in the world. That's what I really believe. I mean, I'm a Christian. Blessed are the peacemakers. Unfortunately, American foreign policy is far too often used to exacerbate and prolong conflicts. I want American foreign policy to be about bringing about peace wherever we can.
Let's take a break. Our thanks to Senator J.D. Vance. We'll take a break. We'll come back here on News Nation, and we'll have questions about a range of what's happening in America. Stay with us. Welcome back to the News Nation Town Hall with Senator J.D. Vance. Here, of course, the running mate to former President Donald Trump. We're in Michigan, we're in Detroit, but we're getting a range of questions from Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And we have our partner X, where they've been posting all week. We're going to give you some of those questions, and then when we air this live, we'll get live posts, and we'll address them in the after show. So here's a question from X. The user unnamed. We'll call them user X.
Okay.
How do you justify campaigning for someone who does not share your beliefs on abortion law, exceptions, or a nationwide ban? If you become president over the next 4 years, would you favor a ban?
Well, first of all, Donald Trump's view is very clear here, and he won the Republican primary, right? So I don't agree with the user that Donald Trump has some massive difference of opinion here, but Donald Trump is the leader of the Republican Party, so his policy determines what we're going to do as a Republican governing coalition. And what he said is very simple, that he wants to, first of all, make it easier for people to choose life to begin with, make it less expensive, help address child care costs, and make it easier for young families to choose life in the first place. But on abortion policy specifically, what happened when the Supreme Court made its decision is that individual states, meaning the people in those states, get to make this decision. And that's Donald Trump's, I think, consistent view, not just over the last couple of years, but really over his entire time in public life. Now, look, I come at this, and I'll be honest with you, I do care about protecting the vulnerable. I do think about this issue and how to make it easier for people to choose life. And I also recognize, Chris, I mean, look, I was raised in a family, I was raised in a neighborhood where I saw a fair number of young women have unexpected pregnancies and choose to terminate those pregnancies because they felt like they didn't have any other options. And I think that very often what we miss on my side, what we miss as Republicans, is that this is not people who are like enthusiastic about having abortion. Sometimes they feel like that's the only option available to them. And so what we, I think, ought to do as somebody who does want to promote the cause of life is to make it easier to choose life to begin with. And I think that if we do that, if we stop the crazy medical bills that young women come home with when they have a baby, if we make it easier to access childcare, I actually think, one, we'll earn the trust of the American people, but two, we'll actually be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I think a lot of Democrats, when they hear pro-life, they assume, well, and I even hear people say this on the campaign trail. They say, well, you're pro-birth, but you don't care about the baby, you don't care about the mom. I think we've got to earn people's care about the moms and I care about the dads. And I think there's something really scary happening in our country right now where so many young families are choosing not to have children at all. They're choosing not to bring new life into the world. Even though they say they would like to, they feel like they can't afford it. That is such a failure of our present leadership that a lot of people would like to have families but can't. We got to change that.
Do you think that reproductive rights being on the ballot this time may affect the outcome of the election?
You know, it might, Chris, it might not. I'm not a political prognosticator. All I can do is make my best case to the American people, tell them what we actually plan to do when we're in office, and make our case and let the chips fall where they may. I mean, ultimately, I don't decide who the next president and vice president is. I guess I get one vote out of over 100 million, but it's going to be the voters who make those decisions. And so I leave the prognostication to other people. I just try to make the case that I think we can actually have a reasonable compromise position on this issue where California makes its abortion policy, Michigan makes its abortion policy, Florida makes its abortion policy, and at the federal level, we make it easier for young families to choose life to begin with.
All right, we've got a question from the audience. Douglas, political rhetoric. What could that mean? That could mean anything. What do you have?
Hi guys, good afternoon. As you said, I'm Doug. I'm with a local utility. If elected, God forbid something happens to President Trump, are you prepared, or how are you prepared to lead this country?
Yeah, well, Doug, I thank you for asking that question. And again, I want to say that President Trump, trust me, I've gotten to know him extremely well. He's going to be president for 4 full years, and I think he's going to do a very good job for the American people. But you're right. God forbid, sometimes things happen. And I think that what I'll draw most on, of course, is my life experience. I think that's true for anybody in any job, right? And look, I served in the United States Marine Corps, so I saw the consequences of bad foreign policy from our leaders. I built a business, I created jobs, so I saw the consequence of bad economic and regulatory policy. And of course, I've served in the United States Senate, so I know a little bit about government. And I think that that's what we need in Washington is people who know a little bit about government, but not people who are career bureaucrats or career politicians. And I think that in some ways we've really failed to solve the big challenges in our country because we keep on going back to the well of the same people, the people who've been in government for 30, 40 years. I've seen this. I've seen this a little bit. It's really interesting. People who have been in government for too long, they get this idea that big things can't happen anymore. I mean, think about this. In 1969, within the lifetimes of a lot of people in this room, the National Aeronautic and Space Administration, NASA, went to the moon. We went to the moon. We haven't been back to the moon in 40 years. Like, why are we not thinking about doing big things in the United States of America anymore? And I think it's because we've got this bureaucratic mindset in government. And it's one of the things that I really like about President Trump is he built great buildings. He built great things. When somebody says, no, you can't do that in government, he often says, well, let's find a way to get it done, even if a bureaucrat says no, because that's how you ultimately create prosperity. We've got way too much naysaying in our government. I actually believe in the American nation. I believe we can do big things again, but sometimes sending the same old people to do the same job, that's not how you do big things. That's how you get more high inflation, more open borders, and more small thinking from our government officials like Kamala Harris.
So, Senator, you're going to want to sit down for this one.
Oh, no.
Not unlike Beetlejuice. If you invoke the former president's names too many times in a row, he's going to want to weigh in on what is being said about him. And we have a call right now from former President Donald John Trump. He wants to weigh in. Mr. President, I know there's a little bit of a delay. Can you hear us? And what is your question for the senator?
Well, I can hear you, Chris, and I do have a question, and I think it'll be quite an interesting one. The answer should be easy. How brilliant is Donald J. Trump?
Take your time. Think about it.
Well, first of all, sir, this is supposed to be undecided voters. I would hope that I have your vote, of all people. But here's, first of all, sir, of course, you're very brilliant, and we both agree. We both agree that it's important to have very smart people running our government. But here's the thing about President Trump that, aside of you, sir, if you'll forgive me for telling this story, that I think often people don't see. And of course, I got my beautiful wife here in the front row, and one of my favorite moments with President Trump is we were hosting an event
King's
for him
honor,
near our home in
Be
Cincinnati
careful.
a few months ago, and of course, you know, my wife was a little bit nervous to really, you know, talk to the president of the United States. And he asked her, "What do you think about your husband being in public service?" And she gives, if you know my wife, a very diplomatic answer. You know, "Sir, he really cares about the people of Ohio. He's thrilled to be able to serve them, and I'm happy to support him however I can." And President Trump chuckles and goes, "Yeah, my wife hates it too." and the thing that it did is it just immediately broke the barrier. And it wasn't the former president, it was just a person talking to my wife, and I think you guys were able to have a nice conversation. But that ability to relate to anybody in any environment, I think that's the true brilliance of Donald J. Trump.
It's very nice, and I appreciate it. Maybe I'll ask a second one. I watched, believe it or not, CNN last night. And in watching it, I watched the town hall with Kamala. Now let me ask you a second, Hoping, and it was not good. How brilliant is Kamala?
Oh, that's a very tough one, sir. I'm supposed to say something.
Don't say it. Don't say it. I don't want to hear. We don't need any more. We're doing just fine. And by the way, Chris, JD is doing a fantastic job. Could not be happier. He's really captivated people, and they love him. And we're leading by a lot, as you know. The early voting, people don't want to talk about it. I shouldn't be talking about it, but we're leading by
Victory lies ahead.
a landslide, as they say, and we're very happy about it. And again, we're very happy with you, Chris. Take care of yourself.
All right, thank you, Mr. President.
Take care, Mr. President. Thank you.
Well, take care of myself. Was that kind of some kind of veiled threat? Do you have some kind of policy with journalists for the next administration? You wouldn't
No,
know.
man, we're pro First Amendment. We're the only
Glory to
candidates
the Senor.
that are pro First Amendment in this race. But you know, here's the president asked me how brilliant is Kamala Harris. I'll give a more diplomatic answer than maybe I want to. What really bothers me, actually, when I see Kamala Harris do these interviews, is I think that there's something a little insulting about answering in slogans and avoiding every question, rather than just saying what you actually think. And look, I'm not perfect, and I'm sure there are many issues where even the people in this room disagree with me on some of it or a lot of it. But I think it's important for the person who wants to be your president or vice president to just answer the question and say what you want to do. And it really bothers me that it's like every time somebody puts a microphone in front of her, she doesn't answer the question. You know, it's like, what do you want to do to lower prices on American families? And she's like, I grew up in a middle-class family. It's like, okay,
Embrace
that's
the
interesting.
shadow.
But then what are you going to do for those middle-class families to lower the price of groceries and of rent? And I think it should really worry us about having that person represent us in a private meeting with Vladimir Putin when she can't even answer questions to the American people.
All right, we're going to keep asking you questions. We'll keep getting answers. Let's take a break here. Please come back to us here at News Nation. We have more
What will you
questions from a
require?
range of undecided voters
Our
about
time
what matters to
will
you in America. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to News Nation's Town Hall with Senator Vance here. We're in Michigan, in Detroit, but we're getting a range of questions from a range of undecided voters. Back to the audience with Rocky. What is your question, sir?
I'm Rocky Rutschkowski, and Semper Fi, Senator.
Semper Fi, Rocky,
and
thank you.
supporter. I'm a retired military officer, a lieutenant colonel from the United States Army, and a proud Polish American. We strongly support the president, or I support this president's Middle East policy and your Middle East policy and the past Abraham Accords. A little bit concerned with your Ukrainian policy.
Understood.
But you're going to inherit a $37 trillion debt when you come into office.
Mm-hmm.
How do we maintain that debt payments, and our national security for ourselves, for our national security, and for our allies?
Yeah, very, very good question. And I appreciate that you don't always agree with us on everything. Hopefully, we can have a reasonable conversation here, because I think that's what the country really needs. And I appreciate your question. I appreciate the spirit in which you asked it most of all. I think on the debt in particular, look, there are three big reasons why we have a sky-high debt. And you'll forgive me maybe for getting into the weeds a little bit here, but if you go back to 2019, the federal government spent $4.4 trillion. And now in 2024, we'll probably spend about $6.8 trillion. Now you ask yourself, okay, that's $2.4 trillion in a very short period of time.
Yes.
The big thing that happened is that all the emergency spending that we did during the COVID pandemic to prevent people from losing their jobs and losing their business, this was important stuff. We made that spending permanent under Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, and that's why the debt is so sky high. That $2.4 trillion, most of that is hangover from 2020 and 2021. We're not in the emergency, right? Thank God we're not in the pandemic times anymore. So let's get federal spending back to a reasonable level. That's the first thing that we ought to do to tackle the debt. Now, you mentioned debt service payments, right? And that's another big issue is we're spending about $1 trillion, not on anything, not on a program for our people, not on, food for poor Americans, not on Social Security, but on interest payments on the debt. And the big reason why we're spending so much is because the interest rates are way too high, right? The same mortgage interest rate that you're paying that is way higher than it was 3 years ago, that means our debt service payments have shot through the roof. So what do? You unleash American energy, you'll lower the cost of goods, you'll lower the cost of interest rates, and then we could probably save hundreds of billions of dollars a year just from lowering interest rates for American families. And the third thing that I'd say is, look, I'm a big believer in the American people and the engine of prosperity. If we bring more good middle-class jobs back to our country, if we rebuild the manufacturing and industrial base of the United States of America, that means you're going to have a lot of people who are working instead of not working. And when they're working and they're paying taxes and they're supporting their families, of course, it's not just good from a federal budget perspective. It's good from the perspective of we want people to have dignified work and good jobs. Final thing I'll say, sir, this is, again, this does not get enough attention in our country. You look at the amount of money from housing benefits to Medicare to Social Security that we're spending on illegal aliens in this country, it is going to break our country. We have got to make sure that American benefits go to American citizens. Because when you allow millions of people in, you roll out the red carpet, and then you give them benefits, again, I don't think they're bad people, but my job as your next vice president is to look out for American citizens, and that means our tax dollars ought to go to our people.
Have you ever talked to the former president about lessons learned from 2016? As you know, Trump offended a lot of traditional conservatives with his spending after the tax cuts in 2016, which absolutely led to the deficit and the debt. Do you believe it would be done differently this time?
Well, I think if you go back to what really increased spending was that COVID emergency spending. Actually, I think we were in a pretty good place for the federal budget and the federal debt until COVID came along. And look, he had a decision to make. I think it was the right decision. It was, look, do we actually save people's jobs and save people's businesses, or do we allow the economy to drive off a cliff? I think President Trump made the right decision in saving people's jobs and businesses. The problem is that was an emergency response to the worst pandemic we've seen in 100 years. You can't keep that going. You can't keep those same levels of spending going after the pandemic is over. That's why we have the debt problem we have today.
Yeah, I mean, he spent a lot before also, but you're right. It's both things at once. Now, related to what the answer is that you had given, I want to go back to X, a post that is related to that. Do you believe there's a simple solution? This is from user Judy, okay, for homelessness, especially for the mentally ill?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I know, Judy, I appreciate it, and any of us who live near or even just visit a big city to go to dinner or have a nice night out know that the homelessness problem in this country, especially in our big cities, is completely out of control. And this actually goes something, I'm going to criticize President Reagan going back 40 or so years, because President Reagan made a decision to cut mental health care in this country. And the decision that we made collectively as a nation was we were going to let people live on the streets instead of sometimes being committed to inpatient mental health facilities. Now, what that has meant is that our taxpayers have picked up the burden of caring for those mentally ill folks. If you go to a county lockup, and we have law enforcement officers here today, if you talk to a local sheriff, a lot of times our local jails have just become housing facilities for people who suffer with mental illness. I don't think that it's compassionate to let the mentally ill fester on the streets. Some of them have addiction problems, some of them have other health problems. I think we need to get back to saying that if you have real mental health problems, you've got to go to an inpatient treatment facility, get the care that you need, and not stop harassing people on our streets. That's not compassionate. It's not compassionate for the mentally ill. It's not compassionate for our residents in our cities. We've got to get back to something that actually wasn't perfect, and I wouldn't say it was perfect, but our model now of just letting people hang already out in the streets. Some of them are freezing to death. Some of them are dying of overdoses. It was a mistake, and I think all leaders should be able to say, we made a mistake. Let's try something that actually works this time.
In many of the cases, you can't even compel care. So if people don't want to go in, they can't. Over 30,000 of the homeless in this country are veterans. And boy, if that's not an emergency, I don't know what is. All right. What is your name and what is your question and what is your topic?
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and I'm an account manager for an automotive supplier here locally. My question is, 2 weeks from today, half of our country is going to be devastated. And so, looking at it from the winning side versus the losing side, do you have any thoughts on how the winning side can help, outreach or lend a hand to those that might not like the outcome?
Yeah, well, Rebecca, I really appreciate that question, and I think it's important because you're right, and I think we're going to win. And so maybe like 49% of the country or 45% or whatever number it is, it's going to be a lot of our fellow Americans who didn't vote for us. But I think one, leadership can really set the tone. And, people forget this after the election of 2016. And, I'm going to brag on my running mate here a little bit, that after the election of 2016, Donald Trump talked a lot about the importance of unity, about the importance of bringing our country back together. He talked a lot about how there were people in the Republican Party who wanted him to arrest Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump said, no, it's time for us to heal as a country, actually realize that we're on the same team. So I think the most important thing, ma'am, is, of course, President Trump most importantly, but also we just have to set the tone, right? We have to set the tone that we're all Americans, we're all in this together, and that we're all part of the same American family. But then I think also we all have responsibility here. I mean, one of my favorite quotes about American citizenship is that it's not easy, right? American citizenship is hard. You've got to be smart about the issues. You've got to know our history. You've got to pay attention and study to what's going on. We've got to be better at communicating and talking to one another. The biggest thing I worry about, we're talking about threats to democracy. That's a term you use. To me, the biggest threat to democracy is the rising tide of censorship. The idea that we should be trying to silence our fellow Americans rather than persuade them to talk to them. That's always going to lead to people pissed off because they don't like to be told what to say. They like to talk to one another. And that's one thing that I'll always commit to is you're vice president for the next 4 years. I'll always try to talk to people. We'll go out there and we'll do events with people who disagree with us. We'll answer questions from people who don't always see eye to eye. But I think if we set the tone at the top, the leadership of this country is all about communicating with one another. I think that's how we start to heal the divide. But we all have a role in it. And
Your search is done. Let fate choose now.
Don't be too personal all the time, but one of the things I've seen, especially from some of my wife's friends and some of my friends, is that they disagree with us on politics sometimes. They'll get very personal about it. And if you're discarding a lifelong friendship because somebody votes for the other team, then you've made a terrible, terrible mistake and you should do something different. Like, don't.
Come forth, my minions! Unleash your breath! Choke them with the stench of death!
But I've got friends who like me personally, acquaintances who aren't necessarily going to vote for me. That doesn't make them bad people. And we can't, this is my most important advice, whether you vote for me, whether you vote for Donald Trump, whether you vote for Kamala Harris, don't cast aside family members and lifelong friendships. Politics is not worth it. And I think if we follow that principle, we'll heal the divide in this country. Thank you.
Have a seat. A couple of questions about who you are for the American audience, and then I'll say thank you.
Okay.
It was interesting watching the debate with Governor Walz. You surprised a lot of people with your demeanor in that. There was an expectation that you were going to come out there swinging. And there was... I
think that's illegal, Chris.
There was... it depends. But that there was an accommodation, there was a decency. So when people hear you in the mode of what was happening in Springfield, Ohio, and what you said then, and the combativeness that has been attributed to you, what do you want them to know about who you are when those statements are made?
Well, I guess what I would want people to know is that all of us are complicated, right? I mean, sometimes I meet people in this country. I met a woman who was talking about struggling to pay for groceries, but then she spent 3 minutes telling me that she said a prayer, not just for me and for my wife, but for our children by name every single night. And that's incredible generosity of spirit. So sometimes I meet people like that, and I feel incredibly optimistic and hopeful about our country. Sometimes I see it, flying into Michigan today, the entire countryside is orange, green, and yellow, and I think, my God, we've got a beautiful country. And then sometimes I see that Kamala Harris has done something else to open the border, and I get kind of pissed off. But I guess I just think that's sometimes you're frustrated with our leadership, but you can still love our country. Sometimes you can agree with somebody, even if you plan to vote against them. It's just nobody is one emotion all the time, and that's certainly true of me. Sometimes, I'm a happy-go-lucky guy. I'm playing with my dog and playing with my kids, and then sometimes I read about, just this happened 2 days ago to me. A young family came up to me and told me that their son, a United States Marine, had gotten killed by the Mexican drug cartels, and that pissed me off. And I think we can be complicated people, we can have a multitude of emotions, and that's who I am, and I think
Cano.
people are too.
So on the issue that is really motivating the domestic agenda right now, which we're not really used to seeing, which is immigration, right? We don't usually see it being dominant in an election dialogue the way it is now. Although maybe it's the role in 2016 that we just didn't give enough importance to. The truth is enough about what's happening at the southern border. When you think about these statements about who's eating dogs and cats in Springfield, do you wish that had been handled differently by you and others?
What I said then, and I'll say it is, you're hearing a lot of things from your constituents. They're telling you things, and I think it's important for me to listen to the people that are coming to me with their problems. Now, do I think that the media certainly got distracted on the housing crisis and the health crisis and the crisis in the public schools by focusing on the eating the dogs and the cats things? Yeah, I do. And do I wish that I had been better in that moment? Maybe, but it's also people in my community, people that I represent are coming to me and saying, this thing is happening. What am I supposed to do? Hang up the phone and tell them they're a liar because the media doesn't want me to talk about it?
It is done.
One of the things that I've learned in my time in the United States Senate is that sometimes the media doesn't always listen to people.
Then let us
and sometimes
rest,
people say
my
something that
love.
seems outlandish and it turns out being
At
false.
long
And sometimes
last.
people say something outlandish that turns
My
out being true.
family
I mean, I
is
remember in
whole
East
again.
Palestine, if you remember, there
As
was
is
a
my
terrible
soul.
train derailment in East
I
Palestine,
cannot
Ohio,
thank you
and
enough,
people were telling
champions.
me that the rivers were contaminated, the creeks were contaminated. I was like, that sounds kind of crazy. But I went up there, I stuck a stick in the mud, and I realized there's a rainbow in the water. That's not natural. What I took from that is I'd rather listen to the people I represent than listen to bullies in the American media. And that is something that I will.
As long as the truth wins, Senator, as long as the truth wins. Senator J.D. Vance, thank you very much. All of you, thank you very much. All of you, thank you for joining News Nation. Please. The campaign continues and we'll be with you.
Thanks, man.
All right. Well done, Senator, and thanks.
Guys, thank you all for spending some time with us.
Your running mate is known for division.
Very critical of Donald Trump in 2016. I came around.
Who's eating dogs and cats in Springfield? Do you wish that had been handled differently?
Too much censorship. Kamala Harris has done something else to open the border, and I get kind of pissed off.
2 weeks from today, half of our country is going to be devastated.
Questions from a range of undecided voters about what matters to you in America. Senator, you're going to want to sit down for this.
If something happens to President Trump, how are you prepared to lead this country?
There was an expectation that you were going to come out there swinging.
We're all Americans. We're all in this together.
J.D. Vance, thank you very much. Hey, thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your screen. And don't forget, click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.
Leading by a landslide, as they say, and we're very happy about it. And again, we're very...
Hey, thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your screen. And don't forget, Click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.
In this country right now, 300,000 minors. We have no idea where they are.
Oh, that is nonsense.
That is not nonsense.
No, it is. They are not lost. They're released to their sponsors who have to go through background checks. You have no idea what you're talking about.
They don't.
You think 300,000 minors are lost in America? Are you crazy?
I'm saying that. Why, hello there. I'm Ben Shapiro, and I'm co-founder of the Daily Wire and host of the Ben Shapiro Show. And today, I'm surrounded by 25 Kamala Harris supporters. My first claim is Kamala Harris's attempts to put DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion at the center of her policies is destructive.
What can I do for you?
How's it going, dude? Where do I get one of those hats?
Oh, my boy made it for me.
Nice.
So, yeah, first of all, we're standing on stolen indigenous Tongva land.
Keep your feet on the ground.
Are you moving anytime soon?
No, but
Why?
the fact of the matter is I'm born and raised California. We're talking about diversity, equity, and vision. We should.
So why don't
we
you?
Absolutely
you
should.
You could do it today, right now.
Great.
So
we should, but that's not my point here. The point is you're saying that diversity, equity, and inclusion is destructive.
Yes.
Right. So
what is it?
When we look at this country that is built off the backs of slavery and white supremacy, taking the lead, building the roots and foundations of everything that you know and believe today, it's ironic to see a Black and Indian woman who's rising up to the occasion against society, pushing them down. And this isn't just the fact that they're Black and Indian and a woman, it's the fact that
Can you give me an example of how society pushed Kamala Harris down, please?
The demographic of people is what I'm talking about.
Well, yeah, but you suggested that Kamala Harris is being pushed down by society.
I'm not suggesting that, no.
I mean, that's...
So my point is saying that...
I'm sorry, you've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Good to meet you. Whoa. And
hey, Ben.
Hey, how's it going?
Nice to meet you. So my opening question to you would be, why is that a destructive thing? Why is that a bad thing when, for a long time in this country, I feel personally that white men have had an advantage over some communities that have been discriminated against. So why would you say that that is a destructive thing and not, making up for lost time?
Sure. So let me explain what I mean by diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the basic